The top floor of the skyscraper felt like the top of the world. Through panoramic windows, the San Francisco skyline glittered, a sprawling galaxy of lights with the Bay Bridge stitched in silver across the dark water. Inside the event hall, the air was thick with the scent of success, a blend of expensive champagne and calculated ambition. This was Julian's night, the culmination of a decade of sleepless nights and relentless drive. He stood on the minimalist stage, bathed in the warm glow of spotlights, the CEO and founder celebrating the launch of his revolutionary app. Dressed in a custom-tailored suit that screamed authority, he projected an image of absolute control. But the smile he offered the crowd of executives and journalists never quite reached his eyes. They held a deep, veiled exhaustion, a loneliness that no amount of success could fill. He stepped down from the stage into a roaring wave of applause. The sound, a physical validation of his empire. Hands reached out to shake his, voices murmuring congratulations, but it all felt distant, like a scene playing out behind a pane of glass. His personal phone vibrated incessantly in his pocket, a low, urgent hum he dismissed as yet another stream of well-wishes. He was navigating the sea of opportunistic smiles when he saw him, Frank, his head of security and a friend who had been with him since the beginning, was shouldering his way through the crowd. His face was pale, his jaw tight with a tension that was horribly out of place in the celebratory atmosphere. Frank wasn't smiling. He was a harbinger, and the look in his eyes was a silent, frantic alarm that the world Julian had built was about to shatter. Frank didn't waste time with words. He simply thrust a tablet into Julian's hands. The screen glowed with a headline from a major news outlet, the text searing itself into his brain. CEO Julian under investigation for massive fraud. Fiancé alleged to be mastermind. The words were a foreign language, a cruel joke that his mind refused to process. In that same instant, a notification lit up his own phone. It was a sterile, automated alert from his bank. All personal and corporate accounts had been frozen by federal court order. The noise of the party dissolved into a dull, ringing silence. His eyes darted across the room. A desperate, frantic search for Olivia, his fiancée, the woman he trusted above all others. He found her near the exit, standing with Kyle and Derek, his business allies. She glanced back at him, and her look was not one of concern or confusion. It was cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of remorse. The floor fell away. The air in his lungs turned to ice. The whispers started immediately, a ripple of shock turning into a tide of judgment as phones across the room lit up with the same devastating story. People began to step back, creating a visible, isolating circle of disgrace around him. He was suddenly toxic, a pariah in the very room built to celebrate him. The public humiliation was instant and brutal, but it was the quiet, triumphant cruelty in Olivia's eyes that truly broke him. He stood paralyzed, a monument to his own naivete. Then, through the parting crowd, a single figure moved toward him, against the current. It was Claire, his project manager of 10 years. She didn't offer pity. Her gaze was steady, her voice firm. "I'm with you," she said, cutting through the chaos. "Let's get out of here." It's hard to imagine the strength it takes to be the one person who walks toward the fire when everyone else is running away. If you believe in the power of loyalty, subscribing to our channel allows us to keep telling these important stories. The descent from the top of the world was a silent, dizzying fall. In the sterile confines of the glass elevator, the glittering city lights blurred into streaks of gold and silver, a beautiful, mocking testament to a life that no longer felt real. Claire drove, her hands steady on the wheel of her modest sedan, a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles Julian was accustomed to. She didn't offer empty platitudes or ask invasive questions. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound, a gentle rhythm in the deafening chaos of his mind. He stared out the window at the passing streets, seeing not the vibrant life of San Francisco, but the ghost of Olivia's smile, the cold, final calculation in her eyes. The betrayal was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it impossible to draw a full breath. He had built an empire of code and capital, but in that moment he felt like a fool, a child who had trusted a monster. In the days that followed, Julian's sprawling mansion became his prison. The minimalist architecture, once a symbol of his clean, ordered success, now felt stark and accusing. Every empty room echoed with memories. Every reflective surface threw back the image of a broken man. He unplugged the phones, ignored the frantic buzzing of the doorbell, and let the world outside fade away. He existed on a diet of whiskey and news reports, watching his own public execution on a loop. Commentators and so-called experts dissected his life, painting him as a greedy villain, a modern-day Icarus who had flown too close to the sun. The shame was a corrosive acid, eating away at his identity. He had always defined himself by his achievements, by the respect he commanded. Now, stripped of his fortune and his reputation, he was nothing. He was the lie they were all telling about him. It was Frank who broke through the self-imposed exile, using a spare key Julian had given him years ago. He and Claire entered the darkened living room not with pity, but with a quiet purpose that cut through the stale air. Frank, a man of few words, simply stood guard at the door, a silent, unmovable pillar of support. Claire placed a single, thick manila folder on the coffee table amidst the empty glasses and discarded newspapers. She didn't force him to look at it. She just sat in the armchair opposite him, her presence a calm and steady anchor in his turbulent sea of despair. She waited, her gaze unwavering, not with the expectation of a broken man, but with the quiet faith that the man she knew was still in there, buried beneath the rubble of betrayal and public humiliation. Claire's voice, when she finally spoke, was even and measured, devoid of any hint of, "I told you so." She explained that for over a year she had harbored a quiet unease about Olivia. It was never one big thing, but a collection of small, almost imperceptible dissonances. A comment Olivia made about a competitor that was too specific, a private financial document left open on a laptop, a pattern of meetings with Kyle and Derek that were always off the official calendar. Claire admitted she had started keeping a private log, documenting these small inconsistencies, feeling foolish for her paranoia, but unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She hadn't acted on it, terrified of being wrong, of destroying Julian's happiness and her own career over what could have been a simple misunderstanding. Her confession was not an accusation, but a quiet apology for not being able to stop the inevitable. She opened the folder, revealing not a smoking gun, but a meticulously organized collection of emails, expense reports with questionable entries, and a timeline of Olivia's private meetings that corresponded perfectly with suspicious stock trades made by shell companies. Each document was a small piece of a much larger, more sinister puzzle. It was proof of a long, calculated betrayal, a conspiracy that had been unfolding right under his nose while he was blinded by love and trust. He looked at the papers, then at Claire's face, etched with a sorrowful resolve, and at Frank, who stood sentinel by the door. These two people, who owed him nothing more than a salary, were risking their own reputations to stand with him when everyone else, including the woman he had planned to marry, had abandoned him to the wolves. They were offering him the one thing he thought he had lost forever: unwavering, unconditional loyalty. The dam inside him finally broke. It wasn't a loud, theatrical sob, but a silent, gut-wrenching collapse. Tears he didn't know he had left streamed down his face, a raw and painful release of the shock, the shame, and the profound loneliness that had consumed him. He didn't try to hide it. In that moment, stripped of his power and his pride, he was just a man who had lost everything. He let himself be vulnerable in front of them, and their quiet, accepting presence was the first real comfort he had felt since his world had imploded. Claire simply pushed a box of tissues toward him, her eyes soft with an empathy that asked for nothing in return. It's a rare and beautiful thing to see someone find the strength to fight back, not with anger, but with the support of those who truly care. If you believe in the power of these human connections, subscribing to our channel helps us continue to share them. As the first light of dawn filtered through the panoramic windows, a shift occurred within Julian. The storm of grief began to subside, replaced by a cold, clear calm. He looked at the evidence spread across the table, not as a monument to his failure, but as the first step toward reclaiming his truth. The desire for revenge, a hot and bitter taste that had been on his tongue for days, began to cool. He didn't want to destroy Olivia. That would mean letting her continue to define his life, to fill his future with the same poison she had filled his past. He wanted justice. He wanted to clear his name, not for the faceless public or the business partners who had turned on him, but for himself, and for the two people in the room who had shown him the true meaning of honor. The path forward was a brutal, uphill battle. The legal system was a slow, grinding machine, and Olivia, Kyles and Derek were using his own money to fuel their defense, hiring a team of ruthless lawyers who specialized in character assassination. The media narrative was already set in stone. He was the villain of the story, and every attempt his small legal team made to introduce new facts was buried under an avalanche of sensationalist headlines and carefully leaked falsehoods. Old friends and colleagues, people he had mentored and supported, were now lining up to testify against him, trading their loyalty for immunity or favorable deals. He was fighting a war on two fronts, a legal battle for his freedom and a public relations war for his soul, and he was losing badly on both. Their new headquarters was Julian's cavernous living room, the expensive furniture pushed aside to make room for whiteboards and boxes of legal documents. The three of them worked late into the night, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared sense of purpose. Frank used his security background to dig into the shell corporations, following the digital money trail that Olivia had tried so hard to erase. Claire, with her encyclopedic knowledge of the company's operations, became their lead strategist, piecing together timelines and finding the operational anomalies that the high-priced lawyers had missed. Julian, humbled and stripped of his CEO title, became the archivist, the student of his own downfall, poring over years of emails and contracts, relearning his own life through the lens of this new, harsh reality. Through it all, Claire was his anchor. She was the one who would gently pull him back when he spiraled into paranoia, questioning everyone and everything. She reminded him to eat when he forgot, to sleep when he tried to work for 48 hours straight. She never offered false hope, but she was a constant source of quiet strength. One night, as they looked over a particularly damning piece of fabricated evidence against him, he confessed his deepest fear. "How could I have been so blind, Claire?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What does that say about me?" She looked at him, not with pity, but with a profound understanding. "It says you were willing to trust someone completely," she replied. "That's not a weakness, Julian. That's a human heart. They abused it. We're just going to prove it." The internal struggle was, in many ways, harder than the external one. Every day was a battle against the voice in his head that told him he deserved this, that his ambition had been a form of arrogance, and this was his punishment. He had to learn to trust again, starting with the two people who had earned it, and most difficult of all, he had to learn to trust his own judgment again. He started to see the world not as a series of transactions and strategic alliances, but as a web of human connections, some fragile, some unbreakable. He saw that the empire he had built was made of glass, but the loyalty of Claire and Frank was forged from steel. This small, determined team of three was not just fighting a legal case, they were fighting to restore a single, fundamental truth in a world of lies. The tension mounted with each passing week. Their funds were dwindling. While Olivia's team seemed to have a bottomless war chest, they faced motions to dismiss, threats of countersuits, and the constant, grinding pressure of a justice system that seemed to favor the powerful and the well-connected. Yet with every obstacle, their resolve hardened. They were no longer just an employer and his two loyal employees. They were a family, forged in the crucible of crisis, the shared struggle, the late nights. The small victories and the crushing setbacks created a bond between them that was more real and more valuable than any business deal Julian had ever made. He was no longer fighting to get his old life back. He was fighting for the chance to build a new one, on a foundation of truth and with the right people by his side. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the air thick with the unspoken weight of a man's life hanging in the balance. Julian sat on the witness stand, not as a powerful CEO, but as a man stripped bare, his entire history dissected under the cold, sterile lights. His lawyer, a quiet but tenacious woman Claire had found, approached the bench. In her hand, she held a small audio device. With a nod from the judge, she played the recording Claire had painstakingly recovered from a corrupted server backup. It was Olivia's voice, clear and unmistakable, calmly discussing with Kyle how they would liquidate the last of the offshore assets once Julian was convicted. A collective gasp swept through the room. The sound was a death knell for the defense, a clean, sharp blade of truth that sliced through months of lies. Olivia's face, a carefully constructed mask of detached composure, finally shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. The prosecutor, a shrewd man who recognized a pivotal moment, rose slowly. He addressed the judge but looked at Julian. "Your Honor, given the clarity of this new evidence, I believe the victim should have an opportunity to speak to the impact of this crime." The room fell into an expectant hush. Journalists leaned forward, their pens hovering over their notepads, anticipating the venom, the righteous fury of a man so publicly and intimately betrayed. This was the climax they had been waiting for, the final, explosive condemnation. Olivia seemed to shrink in her chair, bracing for the verbal onslaught she so richly deserved. Julian took a long, slow breath, his eyes sweeping over the jury, over Frank's stoic face in the front row, and finally, locking onto Olivia's. The silence was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled with rage. When Julian spoke, his voice was not the thunderclap everyone expected, but a quiet, steady current that flowed into every corner of the room. He looked directly at Olivia, his gaze devoid of the hatred she had earned, filled instead with a deep, conquered sorrow. "You didn't just steal my money," he said. The words simple, yet devastatingly profound. "That was just a number on a screen. You took something irreplaceable. You stole my time, years of my life I will never get back. You stole my belief that people could be trusted, that the world wasn't just a series of calculated transactions." He paused, letting the truth of his statement settle over the courtroom. "You planted a poison inside of me, a deep and bitter root of hate, and I have spent every waking moment since then trying to claw it out of my own soul." He held her gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the chasm that now lay between the people they once were. "And today," he continued, a new strength resonating in his tone, a quiet liberation, "I am choosing to stop. I will not let the hate you planted define the rest of my life. I will not carry the weight of you for one more day." A murmur of confusion rippled through the gallery. This was not the speech of a victim seeking vengeance. "I forgive you." The words hung in the air, stunning the room into silence once more. He saw the shock on her face, on everyone's faces. "Not for you," he clarified, his voice unwavering and firm. "I forgive you for me, so that I can finally, truly be free." It was not an act of grace for her, but an act of profound self-reclamation. From her seat in the public gallery, Claire felt silent tears trace paths down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness for what was lost, nor of triumphant victory, but of overwhelming pride for the man before her. She was witnessing not just a legal exoneration, but a human resurrection. He had faced the monster that had tried to consume him and had chosen not to become one himself. As if feeling her thoughts, Julian's eyes lifted from Olivia and found hers across the crowded room. In that single, sustained glance, everything was said. It was an acknowledgement of the impossible fight they had weathered together, a testament to the unbreakable strength of loyalty and the silent promise of a new beginning built not on riches, but on respect. The judge's gavel had yet to fall, but the most important verdict had just been rendered. The wheels of justice, though they had ground slowly, ultimately delivered their verdict. Olivia, Kyle, and Derek were found guilty on all counts, their carefully constructed web of deceit unraveled by a single, undeniable thread of truth. The sentences were long, fitting the scale of their betrayal, yet Julian felt no surge of vindictive pleasure as he watched them being led away. There was only a profound sense of closure, the quiet turning of a final page on the most painful chapter of his life. He didn't return to the hollow shell of his former company or attempt to reclaim the throne of his fallen empire. Instead, he systematically liquidated every remaining asset, every piece of the life that had almost cost him his soul. It wasn't an act of surrender, but of liberation. He was cutting the last ties to the man he had been, making space for the man he was becoming. With the proceeds, Julian, Claire, and Frank established a new, far more modest enterprise. Their office wasn't a glass tower in the sky, but a renovated warehouse space in a quieter part of the city, filled with natural light, collaborative workspaces, and the constant aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Their new company focused on developing accessible technology for non-profits and community organizations. Alongside it, Julian launched a foundation dedicated to providing legal and emotional support to victims of complex financial fraud. He poured his own harrowing experience into its mission, creating a resource he wished he'd had in his darkest hours. He was no longer building a monument to his own ambition, he was building a sanctuary for others, transforming his deepest wounds into a source of healing and strength for people he would never even meet. His life was smaller now, but infinitely richer. The sprawling, sterile mansion was sold, replaced by a comfortable apartment with a view of a park where he walked every morning. His days were no longer a frantic series of board meetings and strategic power plays, but a balanced rhythm of meaningful work, long conversations, and shared meals with the two people who had become his family. The unspoken bond between him and Claire, forged in the crucible of his ruin, had blossomed into a quiet, steady love built on a foundation of absolute trust and mutual admiration. He had lost a fortune, a fiancée, and a reputation, but in the wreckage, he had found something far more valuable, a genuine sense of peace, a purpose beyond profit, and the profound joy of a life lived with integrity. 2 years later, the three partners stood in their bustling office, raising glasses of sparkling cider to celebrate the successful launch of an app that helped connect homeless individuals with local shelters and services. The laughter in the room was real. The smiles reached every eye. Julian, dressed in a simple button-down shirt, looked lighter, his face free from the deep-seated exhaustion that had once defined him. He had learned that true success wasn't measured by the height of the building you occupied, but by the strength of the foundation you built within yourself. His story was a testament to the fact that one's greatest asset isn't what they own, but who they become after losing everything. Being able to witness and share these journeys of profound transformation is a privilege, and by subscribing, you help ensure that more stories of hope and resilience can be told.